This is an all-new Ferrari. At first glance, it's very striking, curvaceous, somehow subtle in its beauty. Good looks aren't unusual in this market of transport, but this car is much more than just a pretty face. It's a sleeper among proper performance cars.
Calling something a sleeper is really reserved for cars that you don't really expect to be fast but end up being incredibly quick. But these are Ferraris. You should expect Ferraris to be fast. So voice over me seems to just be talking rubbish, except that he isn't, because while these are very fast cars, Ferrari has somehow managed to make them surprisingly fast. But I'll get into that in just a second. First, I want to touch on their design. I find the design of this car to be a bit on the softer side, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It really reminds me of the way that I felt about the 458 Italia. When that came out back in 2010, whenever that was, I thought it was one of the prettiest cars that Ferrari ever made. And since that time, their cars have become progressively more angular, more sharp, more aggressive looking, especially with cars like the Pista and the SF90. With this 296, I feel like they're going a little bit more in the direction that they did with the 458, and I'm very much a fan of that. Now, this being a Ferrari, everything is functional. All of these vents, they're going to channel air either along the bodywork or to cool the brakes. This void that you see by the headlights is functional as well. It channels air also to cool the brakes. This specific car has what's called the Assetto Fiorano package. That's going to give you a bunch of carbon fiber bits like this carbon fiber front splitter. That's going to add about 10 kilograms of downforce. You're going to have this livery, which is inspired by that on the 1963 Ferrari 250 LM. I think it's a very good looking livery. The side profile of this car isn't too over-designed. Again, it's very simple, very pretty. These engine air intakes, these are also going to pay royalties to that Ferrari 250 LM. As the air makes its way over the roof of the car, there's this little spoiler, very, very subtle design, but it forces the airflow down, making it more slippery. As you make your way around the back of the car, this Assetto Fiorano package really helps to emphasize that rear design. You have this rear spoiler which sits in line with the bodywork. It is an active rear spoiler, but unlike with previous cars where its purpose was to reduce drag, on this car, it's to improve downforce. The rear diffuser also functional, and you know that because the entire underside of the car is covered in panels and little fins to help direct the airflow in a way that makes the most aerodynamic sense. The rear exhaust on this car is really quite interesting. The piping for it is very short. We'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about the engine design, but it's made out of Inconel, very similar material that you'll find on a McLaren P1 hypercar. And this is not going to be the only time that you hear me mention hypercar levels of technology on this car. Again, the whole point is I see this as a budget hypercar. Now, the benefits of that Inconel are a couple of fold. It's a lighter material, which you can imagine why that would be a benefit, and also it has some very impressive heat management properties.
Inside, the 296 offers all of Ferrari's latest technology with a heavily driver-focused cockpit. The interior is built around a fully digital interface, much like the one that you find in the much more expensive SF90 Stradale, although here it has a more refined look. All of that is excellent, but I want to get back to that point from earlier about this being a sleeper, because in the middle there is a twin turbocharged engine, much like the 488, the Pista, and the F8 Tributo. However, unlike in those other Ferraris, this isn't a V8.
It's a V6 with two turbochargers and an electric motor, much like its older brother, the SF90. But you might be thinking that because it's a V6 and not a V8, it probably doesn't make all that much power, but you couldn't be further from right, because that electric motor is a reworked, updated, improved version of the one from the SF90, and it alone makes 164 horsepower. The 3-liter V6 makes 654 horsepower, so a combined power output of 819 brake horsepower and 546 pound-feet of torque. All of that goes to the rear wheels only, and 0 to 60, thanks to that 8-speed double-clutch gearbox, is done with in 2.9 seconds. But that's the number that Ferrari claims. This car has actually been tested as quickly as 2.3 seconds. The Nürburgring lap time is 6 minutes 58.7, a blisteringly fast time, and actually the first ever production Ferrari to break the 7-minute mark. But this car, this engine, this powertrain is so much more than just the numbers on paper. The design takes it quite a lot further.
It is the first plug-in hybrid Ferrari with rear-wheel drive, the first V6 production Ferrari since the Dino in the 70s. That electric motor is actually an evolution of the one you find in the SF90 with a 20% increase in power and torque output. The orientation of the cylinders is set to an angle of 120 degrees. This for a lower center of gravity and room for the turbochargers to be mounted closer to the exhaust manifolds. This improves their efficiency and response. Those turbochargers are made by a company called IHI, and for any Ferrari historians, they would recognize them as the producers for the turbochargers in the legendary F40. Only on the 296, they can spin up to 180,000 RPM.
I'd like to stay on the subject of those turbos, if I may, for one more real quick point, because their placement is quite important. They're really in the hot V of the engine, and the benefits of that are really quite extraordinary. Because of their location, you can shorten and decomplicate the exhaust system. That's going to improve flow, improve performance, and I'm sure it plays a factor into the sound quality as well. This engine was coined by Ferrari Piccolo V12, or small V12 in English, and that's because it was especially designed to produce that amazing visceral V12 sound quality that is so loved from Ferrari, all out of a much smaller package. Now, obviously, these cars had to get here somehow, and that's because we drove them here, so I had the opportunity to experience it a small bit, and I must say it's one of the best sounding modern Ferraris I've ever driven. The cost for all of this goodness, well, the coupe is around $320,000 and the GTS is about $370,000. Now that might sound like a lot of money, but bear with me for just a second because there's another perspective I think you should be considering. This car accelerates faster than a Ferrari LaFerrari, which is another hybrid hypercar, really. The 918 Spider, this is only about a second off of its Nürburgring lap time, so it's not just straight line speed. And on the subject of straight line speed, the Bugatti Chiron, that car with 4 turbochargers and 16 cylinders and a price tag with too many zeros to be able to count, this has the same 0 to 60 time. So it may be a supercar and it is on the higher end of supercar money, but it's punching above its weight class because it's performing with hypercars, and that's really where the title of this video comes from. It's a budget hypercar. But what I want to do right now is take it out for a real quick drive and see what is it actually like on the road. I actually watched a video done by CarWow, Matt Watson over at CarWow, about this car where he drag raced it against the SF90. Now, the SF90 is this car's older brother. It's more expensive, it has all-wheel drive, it has more power, 2 additional cylinders, and yet you might be surprised to find that, well, this lost. But it only lost from a standing start. From a rolling start, when that all-wheel drive advantage is taken away, the 296 actually won. And that just goes to show how extremely impressive this car is, how it punches so far above its weight class. You're driving a Ferrari and you think, you know, I'm at the top of the echelon of performance cars, so can you really punch above your weight class anymore? Yes, you can, because there's always a faster car. With this 296, it's really hard to believe that there is a faster car, and though it is a very expensive car, relative to the cars that it competes with, it's not really that expensive. Admittedly, learning that it was a V6, I was a little bit concerned about a couple of things, whether or not it was going to actually have the power delivery that I was expecting, whether the sound quality was going to be there, the responsiveness, having turbochargers and over 800 horsepower, is there going to be a lot of lag? The hybrid system that they've developed for this car is something that I've never experienced before, and it means that you pretty much have no lag.
If I change down to 5th gear, 2,500 RPM, foot down, power is immediate. It's as if though I'm right in the power band all of the time. And the sound quality is amazing. They worked very hard to fine-tune that sound quality so that it was still enjoyable. Other things that I love about the way this car feels, it's very nimble. I think that nimbleness is helped by the shorter wheelbase. In fact, this car has the same or very similar wheelbase to the Ferrari F430, which I think is a great platform. Despite the fact that it is a hybrid and it has a big, heavy electric motor, you would expect this car to be a lumbering mass, but you would be wrong. This car actually weighs just over 3,200 pounds, which is, honestly, for a modern car, period, that's nothing. But for a hybrid, that's hard to believe. Go over to Lotus, who has the ethos of simplify and add lightness. Their new Emira is a V6, just like this 296, but it lacks the electric motor, and yet it only weighs about 50, 60 pounds less. And this has over 400 horsepower on the Emira. If you can afford this, you owe it to yourself to take it for a drive, because you are going to fall in love with it, just as I am right now. If you told me before getting into this car that it was a V6, I would challenge that. It doesn't sound like a V6. It doesn't really act like a V6. And I've driven the MC20 in a previous video. Great car, phenomenal car, really. Feels like a very old school supercar, and that has a very high powered turbocharged V6. I thought this was going to feel very similar, and it does not. It does not feel similar at all. It feels like a completely different car with an entirely different personality. And it's a personality that's very easy to appreciate. The way that it accelerates is just so spectacular, and its added benefit is that sound, that V12 Concerto, which isn't actually a V12, it's a V6, and it's very efficient, 47 mpge, which doesn't really matter on a Ferrari, but that's so cool. It's such a complete package, such a great performance car for the money. I'm very fortunate on this channel to get to drive some pretty extraordinary cars, plenty of Porsches, a couple of Ferraris, Lamborghinis here and there. I've driven some McLarens as well, but Ferrari is always my favorite to drive because it's just such an intoxicating experience being behind the wheel of one of these. This being only a rear-wheel drive, there's that little hint of danger as you realize that you have to control over 800 horsepower going to only 2 wheels, but being able to be in this car and drive this car and enjoy this car, I can tell you that it's definitely not a disappointment. It exceeded my expectations, and I really do love this car. It's probably one of my favorite modern Ferraris. This is the sleeper of the supercar world. But that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave me your thoughts in the comments below. A huge thank you to Ferrari of South Bay for loaning me these 2 stunning examples. So I will leave their contact and their links down in the description below. Like and subscribe to show your support for the channel. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss a post. But until the next video, thanks again for watching and take care.